egg came millions of years before the chicken. And reptiles were the first layers of the land egg. The original reptiles all laid the land egg, but now we have some reptiles that don't lay the land egg. Reptiles that don't lay the land egg are boas, which give birth to live young, they're viviparous. And we have pit vipers that are viviparous, garter snakes are viviparous, and there are some skinks and chameleons, old world chameleons, that are viviparous. But the original reptiles were all layers of the land egg. Birds are amniots, layers of the land egg, and still are all laying the land egg without exception. Unlike the reptiles that some evolved vivipary and giving birth to live young and not laying eggs, birds are still all layers of the land egg, and we'll talk about why that might be the case. Believe it or not, you're an amniot, and I understand you don't lay the land egg, but the original mammals all laid the land egg, and we still have some mammals that are still layers of the land egg. The duck-billed platypus, which is a mammal, and the spiny anteaters, which are sometimes called echidna. There are a couple of species of those that are still layers of the land egg. But of course, most mammals don't lay the land egg anymore. Some are pouched mammals, marsupials, and most are the true viviparous placental mammals like ourselves. So that's the amniots, the reptiles, the birds, and the mammals. Are birds nothing but reptiles? Well, there was one line of reptile that gave rise, the crocodilian line, called the Archosaurian evolutionary line, that those crocodilians led to reptiles called the therapsids, which gave rise to the dinosaurs, and later, as we'll find out, the birds. So that to understand what a bird is, you have to understand where the birds came from. They're amniots. There was a group of reptiles that gave rise to dinosaurs and birds. Another group of reptiles gave rise to mammals. So you could actually say if you trace us back on the phylogenetic tree far enough, you could say we're nothing but reptiles, because the therapsid reptiles are where we came from. To understand this a little better, this is the Synapsid skull that has no temporal opening. This is a reptile that is an anapsid, and the kind of reptiles that have the Synapsid skull are turtles and tortoises. The Synapsid skull has one temporal opening per temporal bone. You're just looking at a diagram of the left side of this skull. You see that it has a nostril right here and an eye socket, and then a temporal opening, and on the other side in the temporal bone there'll be another temporal opening to that skull. This is the Synapsid skull. The group of reptiles that had the Synapsid skull are extinct. They were called the therapsids. The therapsids gave rise to mammals. So this is extinct reptiles in the fossil record show this Synapsid skull. And mammals, of course, have one temporal opening in their temporal bone. If you look at a mammal skull, you would see that. But if we're getting toward the birds, these are reptiles that had the diapsid skull, where you could see the nostril right here, you could see the eye socket right here, and two temporal openings on each side of the skull for a total of 4 temporal openings. But di means 2, a dichotomy means 2. Whoops, I did not mean to do that. A dichotomy means 2. So there are 2 temporal openings. What kinds of reptiles have 2 temporal openings in their temporal bone? Snakes, lizards, the tuatera, and the crocodilians. The crocodilians have this skull. And this is the kind of reptile that gave rise to our modern day birds. And here we can see the temporal openings in the T-Rex skull, 2 temporal openings in their temporal bone. So dinosaurs have the diapsid skull. The crocodilians have the diapsid skull. And it's tuatera, which is not really a lizard, but lizards and the tuatera also have the diapsid skull. And Archaeopteryx, which is billed as the first bird by many, has a lot of reptilian characteristics. This was a very famous fossil that was found on in a limestone quarry in Germany, and you can see the feathered imprint. Since this first one was found, other specimens of Archaeopteryx have been found. Archaeopteryx had a clavicle, a wishbone. Archaeopteryx had a jaw socketed with teeth that no birds have. That's a reptilian characteristic. And Archaeopteryx had a long bony tail, which is also a reptilian characteristic. So Archaeopteryx is kind of billed as like a half reptile, half bird. And by many, Archaeopteryx was considered one of the first birds. And it couldn't fly. They hypothesized that it would glide. And not all birds have feathers for flight. Obviously, there are some birds that can fly, but all birds have feathers for insulation, as we're going to talk about. Endothermy. Birds are endotherms, which sometimes is referred to as warm-blooded, but that's really a misnomer because a reptile on a hot sunny day laying in the sun could have a body temperature hotter than yours or mine. Reptiles and amphibians are called ectotherms, where if they need to warm up like a alligator does, it will bask in the sun and recharge its battery and heat up to be able to digest its food. Ectotherms position themselves in the environment to either raise or lower their body temperature. If they're getting too hot, they'll seek shade. So birds don't do that, and neither do mammals. Birds and mammals are endotherms. And depending on the species of bird, they can run an internal temperature as high as 103 degrees Fahrenheit, where our body temperature on the average is 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. So they're running a hotter furnace than us. They regulate this internal body temperature from the heat of metabolism, from the food they eat. So we have an expression when we're not eating a lot, we'll say that person eats like a bird, meaning they hardly eat. They're hardly eating anything. And that's a misnomer because birds eat a lot to keep their internal furnace burning hotter than yours or mine. So they have a higher metabolism than humans, and they have to eat a lot. Most of the bird's life is spent searching for food or eating. The exception to that is in reproduction. They'll spend some energy on reproduction, but birds have no leisure time on their hands. They don't zoom in to see PowerPoint presentations. They don't watch NFL football. Their life is spent hunting for food and eating to keep that internal furnace burning. We are going to have questions at the end. So if I go over something that you have a question about that needs clarification, if we could do that at the end, that would be great. These are Haversian canals, and vertebrate animals have these spaces in their bone that blood vessels and nerve cells run through. And all vertebrate animals have them. It's just that reptiles and amphibians don't have very many Haversian canals. They're ectotherms. And endotherms, like birds and mammals, have numerous Haversian canals in their bone. So while these paleontologists, which are like the world's greatest detectives, are finding bones and piecing them together, Jack Horner decided that he was going to not fit these dinosaur bones together, but he was going to cut them in cross section to look at the Haversian canals. And if the Haversian canals in dinosaur bones are sparse, like what's found in reptiles or amphibians, that means they had a low metabolism and that they were ectotherms. But if they have numerous Haversian canals, like birds or mammals, that means that they had a high metabolism and is evidence that they were endotherms, these dinosaurs. So that's what he did. He cut it in cross section. And what he found in these hadrosaur, these duck-billed dinosaur bones that he cut in cross section, he found that the dinosaur bones had numerous Haversian canals, even more Haversian canals than mammals have. The number of the Haversian canals was similar to the number that's found in bird bones. So dinosaurs had really high metabolism like modern day birds had. And that's just one of many pieces of evidence. Robert T. Bakker has a book chock full of evidence on dinosaurs being endotherms, how they must have been endotherms. One, I think, interesting piece of information is it takes a crocodile 20 years to get 20 feet. It takes an ostrich 1 year to hatch out of an ostrich egg and become 8 feet tall. Birds are extremely fast growing and reptiles are slow growing. The hadrosaurs with their arrest lines in their bone show that they reach 20 feet in 4 years. So the dinosaur bones tell us that these dinosaurs were fast growing like birds and not slow growing like cold-blooded crocodilians. And there's tremendous evidence. There's other evidence to indicate that dinosaurs like birds were endotherms, at least some dinosaurs anyway. Plumology is the study of feathers. And of course, the only animals on our planet today that have feathers are the birds. That's a characteristic of birds. If we're going to talk about what is a bird, if it is alive, a vertebrate animal with a backbone and has feathers, it's going to be a bird. The potential evolutionary link between feathers in birds and scales in reptiles has been debated for decades. When I took ornithology in college, my ornithology instructor, ornithology is the science that deals with the study of birds, as you guys know, he described a feather as a blown up scale, an enlarged scale for insulation. And today, researchers demonstrate that all these skin appendages are homologous. They're similar in form. And that picture I have on the screen is not a velociraptor foot. That is a picture of a foot that I took when I was in Australia. That is a cassowary. And the cassowary has a footprint like a dinosaur, three-toed, and has a long knife-like nail like a velociraptor has. And these birds are docile to humans unless you corner them. The last person that was killed by a cassowary, where it reared up like a chicken and eviscerated someone, it was a person that was cornering a cassowary where they felt that they were in danger. And that happened, I believe, in the 1930s was the last time someone was eviscerated by a cassowary. They will protect their young and kill dogs with those feet. And you could see the scales on the bird's feet. So birds, like reptiles, do have scales, and their feathers, zoologists consider glorified scales. There's the cassowary that I saw in Australia. This was in Eastern Australia. And the one on the left is a male. It has a helmet on its head that it uses to plow through the jungle called a casque. And the males take care of the young. And this was who he was taking care of. That is a baby double wattled cassowary. You could see the double wattle on its neck. They're sometimes referred to the southern cassowary and sometimes referred to by the common name double wattled cassowary. So I got pretty close to this cassowary, and he didn't feel like I was threatening him, and I wasn't trying to grab his chick or corner him because he had a way to protect himself with those crazy raptor-like feet with that huge nail that they have on their foot for defense. So they have been known to kill dogs that get too close to their young. The KT extinction happened 65 million years ago, which was the undoing of the dinosaurs. An asteroid 11 miles in diameter struck the Earth by Cancun, Mexico. The crater is there, and rocked the Earth and spewed dust into the atmosphere, and what Carl Sagan called a nuclear winter. And a lot of animals and plants, 60%, went down and out. And the dinosaurs, that KT extinction, 66 million years ago approximately, led to the extinction of the dinosaurs, except for one group of dinosaurs that live on today. They're called maniraptors, which are indistinguishable from birds. Modern day birds are avian dinosaurs. They are maniraptors. And there was a period of time before we reached the age of mammals, after the extinction of the dinosaurs, that birds ruled the earth. And what that terror bird is eating is a miniature horse. Horses were not as big as they are today in that era, 60 million some odd years ago. Horses had 5 toes, then 3 toes. They got larger to the hoof they have today. In fact, there's fossils of horses that lived in Florida that you could find in the Peace River that were horses that were not the size of horses today. So this was a land before the age of mammals, and mammals rose up to dominate planet Earth as vertebrate animals, that was dominated by birds when the rest of the dinosaurs went down and out. And birds are still raptors today. When I took a group to Costa Rica, this chestnut mandible toucan on the left didn't read the book on what it's supposed to eat. And we were in the forest in Costa Rica, and a Vespa rat came up off of the forest floor and onto a branch. And this chestnut mandible toucan, which is a subspecies of the black mandible toucan, is the name of the species of this bird, swooped down and caught that Vespa rat in its bill. They didn't understand that they're supposed to be fruit eaters, and this hungry chestnut mandible toucan grabbed that Vespa rat, and it didn't have talons to kill the Vespa rat. So what it did is it beat that Vespa rat on branches and on the bark of the tree, and we watched this, and that upper yellow mandible turned red from the blood of that Vespa rat, and he picked at the rat until he busted it open, and there was a lot of blood, and he got the job done. He ate that Vespa rat, and those blue feet that he was holding it with, he just did not read the book that Vespa rats aren't on the main diet of toucans. But nature, it just is. Predators and hungry birds will eat what they can. This picture I took in Tanzania, East Africa, in Arusha National Park. We had a martial eagle, which is the largest eagle of Africa, circle over our Land Rover. And then it made a beeline across this lake to where these lesser flamingos were feeding with their head down. And we saw him strike the flamingo, killed it on impact. Raptors kill with their feet. And then he lifted that lesser flamingo up and flew toward our Land Rover. And I was able to snap a bunch of pictures with my camera, National Geographic moment. So just like the Velociraptor dinosaurs, these eagles and hawks and osprey, they kill with their feet. That's what raptor means. So birds have feathers, but what we're learning is Archaeopteryx, although it was the first dinosaur to be discovered with feathers, loads of other dinosaurs have been uncovered with feather imprints. And where the hot area right now in paleontology is not the American Southwest where it used to be, but it's in China. China is building highways and malls and buildings, and as they're excavating the earth, they are finding loads of different species of feathered dinosaurs. So paleontologists, if you're interested in finding new species, China has been a gold mine to dinosaur fossils that are dinosaurs that had feathers. And a lot of those dinosaurs had feathers not for flight, but for insulation. Now, there are 7 major feather types. We're going to go over the anatomy of the feather. Where it says rectrix, that is the retrice, that's the tail feather, and it's a kind of contour feather that's symmetrical. And the wing feathers, the remage is asymmetrical, like an airfoil. And those are a type of contour feathers. The contour feather, which are modified for flight in the tail and the wing, are what give the bird its shape and what give the bird its color. So that's what the contour feathers are. And they have a main shaft that you could see with barbs coming off of that main shaft. And a semi-plume would be just under the contour feathers. It is also going to help lift the contour feathers to give the bird its shape. And these feathers are controlled by muscles in the bird. Each feather is controlled, at least the tail, the wing, the contour feathers, and the semi-plume feathers are controlled by nerves and muscles that could raise or lower these feathers to determine air pockets that might provide warmth for the bird or regulate its temperature. The down feather has no central shaft, but as you know, the down feather is for warmth and it's close to the bird's body underneath the semi-plume feathers. And those down feathers are for lightweight and warmth, and humans couldn't manufacture anything better. That's why we take down feathers, and I guess if you're from Florida, you wouldn't know this, but a lot of you are from up north. Down vests and down jackets are stuffed with these down feathers. Humans couldn't perfect what evolution perfected over millions of years of evolution. We couldn't really copy how great down feathers are for insulation for birds. Bristle feathers are sensory in their nature, like whiskers on a mammal, and they also could be serving like eyelashes to protect the eye or the face of the bird. And filiplume feathers are feathers that actually will detect the, have a role in detection of the movement of some of the other feathers to give the bird information on the raising or lowering of some other feathers. And those are the 7 major feather types, with the first 3 being kinds of contour feathers that give, it's the outer feathers of a bird that give them their color and shape. Now, we're talking about bird color. This kind of looks like a northern cardinal, but it's not. I took this picture in Colombia with Rick Greenspan when we led a group to Colombia for birding, and this is called the vermilion cardinal. And of course, our northern cardinal is a beautiful bird as well. But this vermilion cardinal is illustrating true color, where wavelengths of light are absorbed and the red color is reflected. And this is considered true color in birds. But there's another kind of color that birds have called structural color. This is a fiery-throated hummingbird. And that fiery-throated hummingbird, its throat would look black if the light isn't hitting it the right way. These feathers make a prism-like structure. And when the light hits it, it is going to show colors that if the light isn't hitting it the right way, it'll just look black. So this fiery-throated hummingbird has red and orange and yellow and purple and blue colors when the light hits their prism. And their feathers are arranged so it makes a prism like that. And you guys are familiar with structural color because our grackles right here in Florida that look black, you guys have noticed that when you're looking at them and the sun is hitting them right, they don't look black anymore. They look metallic purple and metallic greens, and those are not true colors in those grackles. Those are structural colors where their feathers are acting like prisms to give off different colors if the light is hitting it perfectly. And of course, females are looking for this male fiery-throated hummingbird to be arranged so that the light is hitting it, so they'll recognize that as their man. Now, this is a bird's skeleton, and where the sternum of the bird is, this is important anatomy. Right here, I'm moving my cursor over it. I hope you could see that. That is called the keel of that bird. It's an extension of in their chest. It's an extension that in a ship, a keel is underneath the ship, and it prevents the ship from tipping right to left. Well, it reminded people of the keel of a ship, and this keel of the bird, some birds have that keel-like extension where breast muscles, huge breast muscles, are attached to that keel in the skeleton. So if you know where the chest of the bird is, where that sternum is, that extension that extends out like the keel on a ship is the keel on a bird. And not all birds have the keel. To understand what it's like not to have a keel, you had to understand what the keel was. So these are called ratite birds, and it would be incorrect to call a ratite bird a flightless bird, because there are some birds that have a well-developed keel that can't fly, like a penguin, which is not a ratite bird, it's a carinate bird. So although all ratite birds can't fly, there are some carinate birds that can't fly either. But the anatomy tells you that these are the ratite birds. The world's largest bird that stands over 8 feet tall and weighs over 300 pounds is the ostrich, and that's a male ostrich that's black and white. The female would be brown. In the middle is a male southern cassowary, and how I knew it was a male is the males are the ones that take care of the young, not the females, and since this guy was hanging out with this chick, I knew that this was a male cassowary. I also took that picture on the right when I was in Australia. That is an emu. And an emu is a ratite bird that stands about 6 feet tall and has a green and blue, greenish blue land egg. And in the lower left is a rhea, which could be about 5 feet tall and is the second fastest runner that's bipedal. The fastest runner on 2 legs is the ostrich that could run like a horse at 40 miles an hour. And another strange ratite bird is the kiwi, which is a 4-pound bird that lays a 1-pound egg. Now the ostrich lays a 3-pound egg, but the ostrich weighs over 300 pounds, so that's only 1% of its body weight. But the kiwi is a 4-pound bird that lays a 1-pound egg, 25% of its body weight in its egg. It stretches its pelvis to the max to even lay that crazy big egg. And it seems insane that a small bird like that would lay a 1-pound egg. But actually it was Stephen Jay Gould was the one that figured out why the kiwi lays such a large egg for its size. And if you're interested at the end, when we have question and answer, we'll talk about the kiwi if you're interested in why this ratite bird lays a crazy egg that's 25% of its body weight. But these are the ratites. There are 2 major groups of birds, the ratites, which are these, and the carinate birds that have a well-developed keel. Starting at the top center, that is a roseate spoonbill, and that is a carinate bird that has a well-developed keel. On the right is a king vulture that I took that picture in Costa Rica, and it is landing on the ground, and that king vulture has a well-developed keel. It is a carinate bird. The white pelican that's in Florida in the wintertime, that they migrate to the north now, they've left our area, and I took that at Ding Darling, that picture. That is a carinate bird with a well-developed keel. That green violet ear, that hummingbird, has a well-developed keel, but so does that African penguin. And that African penguin is not flying. It is showing its vertical jump like LeBron James. It's showing its hops. and it is hopping from rock to rock. And it is a flightless bird, but not a ratite bird. It has a well-developed keel. It literally swims through the water like a bird flies through the air. It uses its well-developed keel and huge breast muscles to literally fly through the water. My wife and I in the Galapagos Islands saw a Galapagos penguin in the water when we were diving, and we tried to keep up with it, and it was flying through the water. Now you see it, now you don't. The Galapagos penguin just left us in the dust, and they could swim very quickly through the water like a bird flies through air. So these are carinate birds. Most of the birds on planet Earth are the carnates. The only ratites are the ones you see here. So that's the anatomy of birds and how we divide them into two groups, ratite and carinate. Birds have the most efficient pump ever evolved. They have the four-chambered heart just like your heart. You have the most efficient heart ever evolved, the four-chambered heart. Reptiles and amphibians have a three-chambered heart. Fish only have a two-chambered heart, but birds and mammals have the most efficient heart that vertebrate animals could have, the four-chambered heart. You're looking at these hearts from a ventral view. So your left hand is on their right-hand side. So that's why in the upper left of that bird and mammal four-chambered heart, you're seeing the right atrium because their belly is facing you. So their right is your left. So that ventral view shows the right atrium, then below that, the right ventricle, then on your right, but their left side is the left atrium and the left ventricle. That is the four-chambered heart where oxygenated and deoxygenated blood is kept entirely separate. So only oxygenated blood goes to the body and only deoxygenated blood goes to the lungs. But in the three-chambered heart, which is superior to the fish's two-chambered heart, there's a slight mixing of oxygenated and deoxygenated blood, not as efficient as the three-chambered heart is not as efficient as the four-chambered heart because some oxygenated blood could go to the lungs, which is a wasted trip, and some deoxygenated blood could go to the body, which is a wasted trip. But the crocodilians, just like the birds, what are crocodilians? Alligators, crocodiles, caiman, and gharials are the crocodilians. They have a four-chambered heart just like birds. And keep in mind, they're on the Archosaurian evolutionary line, just like birds. And it's not just the crocodile's anatomy that's bird-like. Their behavior is bird-like. Crocodilians are the only reptiles that vocalize for their mates, and the only reptiles that build a nest, lay their eggs in the nest, and guard the nest. And when the young hatch out, the crocodilians are the only reptiles that show parental care, just like birds. So they're very bird-like in their behavior, and of course in their anatomy with the four-chambered heart. Anatomically, they're bird-like. But unlike the crocodilians and a lot of the dinosaurs, the Maniraptors had hollow bones. Birds have hollow bones. Why do birds have hollow bones? When I ask the students in my class why birds have hollow bones, they'll answer because they're lightweight for flight. It's an adaptation for flight. And it actually is an adaptation for flight, but not actually for lightweight, because bird bones are more dense than mammal bones. Respiration, birds' superpower. Of course, we consider birds' superpower flight because Superman could fly and birds could fly. So birds have that superpower, flight, but birds have a superpower that Superman doesn't have, and it's in their respiratory system. Number one, bird bones are denser than mammal bones and need to be for strength because they're hollow. Number two, as baby birds grow, the air sac that make up its lungs invade its bones, forming a bunch of tiny hollows. The air sacs stay attached to these hollows for the rest of a bird's life. So those hollow bones are filled up with air sacs. Number 3, since birds need increased oxygen for flight, this is an adaptation for flight, having air sacs in the hollows of those bones. And here's their superpower. Forward and backward arrangement of the air sacs helps give birds a little known superpower. They can take in oxygen while both inhaling and exhaling. So their respiratory system is superior to mammal respiratory system or any vertebrate animal for that matter. Oxygen is a requirement. They need that because flight is a high energy requirement. In the mitochondria of cells, birds are going to take glucose and oxygen and turn that into carbon dioxide, water, and 36 ATP for energy for the cells. And birds need a lot of oxygen to power the energy requirement for flight. Or if you're an ostrich, I guess you have a high energy requirement at running at speeds of 40 miles an hour. But ostriches don't have hollow bones and don't have that superpower. A tremendous, tremendous part of a bird's brain is dedicated to vision. Vision is probably the most important sense that a bird has. And they have great distance vision. This is not my picture on the left. This is a peregrine falcon diving. The fastest animal on the planet is not the cheetah that could run at 70 miles an hour. The fastest animal on the planet is the peregrine falcon that could dive at speeds approaching 200 miles an hour. And when they hit their prey, it kind of explodes in the air. As I saw when I was watching a football game in Gainesville at the Swamp, and that was the days of Tim Tebow quarterbacking University of Florida. And in the fourth quarter, Florida had a huge lead, a huge 30-something point lead against Florida State, and the stands emptied out. And when the stands emptied out, peregrine falcons came in and they were hitting pigeons and knocking them into the empty stands where there were no people and feeding on pigeons. And that is the peregrine falcon. And if you're diving at speeds of 200 miles an hour, you better have great distance vision, because things that are far away come up on you very quickly. So if you don't want to fly into the side of a mountain or a building, you better have great distance vision. And color vision, like this Cuban toady that I took a picture of in Cuba. This is my photograph. The Cuban toady has great color vision, and color becomes important for birds to recognize which is the right species for them to reproduce with. There are two kinds of light receptors in birds' eyes, rods and cones. The rods are better for night vision because they're sensitive to small quantities of light, and the cones detect specific color, different wavelengths of light. So they're more important to diurnal birds, birds that are active during the day. Look at that eagle's eyes that are socketed in a way where both eyes could focus on an image. That's called binocular vision. And we say you have an eagle eye, or if we want to mention others in the order of the eagle, which would be hawks with our anceriforms is the, accipitriforms. Accipitriforms is the order of eagles and hawks. If you have a hawk eye, that means you have great vision, or if you have an eagle eye, that means you have great vision. This picture in the middle I took in Portugal. It looks a little bit like a burrowing owl, but it's called the little owl of Portugal. They're going to have more rods than cones. And the great horned owl fledgling, I took this picture at Fort DeSoto in Florida of a fledgling owl that was in a tree in Fort DeSoto. They're going to have more rods than cones in their eye for better night vision. Birds have an outer eyelid that blocks out light, and the vast majority of birds, their eyelid comes up from the bottom to block out light. But great horned owls are an exception to that. The eyelid that blocks out light comes from the top and goes down. But birds have another eyelid besides the one that blocks out light. they have a nictitating membrane that closes from the side. As you can see, this is a masked lapwing, and you can see its eye has a translucent covering. And this protects a bird when they're flying. They could clear their eye, get moisture in their eye without losing vision. And for birds that go underwater, this nictitating membrane serves like a contact lens to be able to have them be able to focus underwater, like you would wear a mask when you're scuba diving to be able to see underwater. They just have the nictitating membrane to be able to see underwater well. So birds have different sets of eyelids. One eyelid on the outside blocks out light when they want to go to sleep, and the other eyelid, when they want to still see, could clear their eye without losing vision. So if you're a peregrine falcon diving at speeds approaching 200 miles an hour, if you lose vision for a second, that could be fatal because you could crash. So they could clear their eye with their nictitating membrane and not lose any vision. Birds have no secrets. You can tell everything about a bird's niche by looking at its beak, legs, and/or feet. The niche is the total role, the occupation, what it does for a living. This bird on the left is kind of related to a chickadee. It's the European version called the great tit. It's called the great tit because it's largest in the tit family. And look at its feet. It has 3 toes forward and 1 toe back for locking onto a branch, and it could sleep in that position. And that is called a perching bird in the order Passeriformes. Most of the 10,000 different species of birds on planet Earth have that kind of foot arrangement, and they're Passeriformes, called perching birds, or sometimes referred to as songbirds. And that perching bird, that great tit, has a spider in its mouth and was bringing that spider to its nest to feed young. This bird in the center kind of looks like our red-bellied woodpecker, but it's not. It's a Jamaican woodpecker that's related, and that Jamaican woodpecker is showing 2 toes forward and 2 toes back. And that foot is for holding on to the side of the bark of a tree. And that chisel-like bill is for drilling into the tree. It could hear beetles underneath the tree, and it knows exactly where to drill. And birds don't have fleshy outer ears like we have, but they do have ears underneath their feathers that they have excellent hearing. Birds could hear higher range of sounds than we do. We could hear in some species of birds, they can't hear the lower range of sound like we can, but sometimes you could see a bird syrinx going and you can't hear anything. Other birds could hear that high pitch. There's sound coming out. It's just above the ability for human ear to pick up. So you could tell everything about a bird by looking at its beak, legs, and feet of what it does for a living. And we already discussed birds are either eating or hunting for food. They just don't have any leisure time on their hands, except for mating season. That is a roseate spoonbill on the right. It has long legs for wading and wide toes for not sinking into the mud, and a spatula-like bill. And I didn't know this, but I used to think that they used that spatula-like bill for eating invertebrates in the water. But an expert on roseate spoonbills came to Venice area Audubon one time and gave a lecture and said they have a surprisingly high amount of little fish, minnow-like fish, in their diet. So that spatula-like bill is not only eating invertebrates like I used to think, but eating a lot of little fish as they go back and forth in the water with that spatula-like bill. This is the secretary bird. I took this picture in Tanzania, East Africa. Its specialty is eating snakes, and it stomps the snakes to death in the tall grass with its raptor-like feet, and then it has a hook-like bill for eating the snake's flesh. And you could tell everything about a bird by looking at its beak, legs, and feet. This is a volcano hummingbird. This picture was taken in Costa Rica. These are my photos. And that volcano hummingbird has little feet. And apod, A-P-O-D, and it's from the order Apodiformes, literally means without feet. And it's a misnomer. They have short legs, but they do have feet, but it's not very noticeable because they're not using those feet when they're feeding, they're hovering. And hummingbirds could fly backwards, could fly forwards, could hover. Their flight is incredible. Their heartbeat is incredible. It's just a amazing niche that these hummingbirds occupy. And they're not just eating nectar. When they stick their long tongue out of that bill, they're also eating insects that could be in the flowers as well, like ants. This was a purple gallinule. That photo was taken at the celery fields. Look at their crazy long toes. And it's for walking on plant vegetation like lily pads, and those crazy long toes enable them to find the plant material that they're going to eat. These pictures taken at the celery fields in Sarasota. Osprey. Osprey, you could tell everything about an osprey by looking at its beak, legs, and feet. Raptor means kill with your feet. They are special compared to the other hawks. This fish hawk has different kinds of talons, and their nails are longer than the talons in other birds, adapted for grabbing a fish, always carrying it head first, always eating the brain first with their hook-like bill. Then there's no struggle, and then they could tear out the flesh with that hook-like bill. This is a northern bobwhite. I took this picture. It's a kind of quail, and the males have a white face. The females have a buff-colored face, kind of brownish, and they're a gallinaceous bird. They scratch the ground for seeds, and they also are omnivores. They have a high part of their diet being insects. So they are omnivores, but their feet are really adapted to scratching seeds, like all gallinaceous birds, order Galliformes. Quail, pheasant, chickens, like prairie chickens, are gallinaceous birds that have feet adapted to scratching the ground for seeds. Nitrogenous waste. You guys are familiar with the nitrogenous waste of birds because it ends up on your windshield. And if you're really lucky, it ends up on your head. I've never understood how getting bird guano on you was supposed to be a sign of good luck, but I guess that's an urban legend. But birds have a nitrogenous waste called uric acid. Another group of vertebrates that have the nitrogenous waste, uric acid, is reptiles. And reptiles were the first vertebrates to invade the land with their land egg, and as an adaptation for not losing a lot of water when they get rid of their nitrogenous waste, they have a less toxic nitrogenous waste than ammonia, which fish excrete ammonia, but the ammonia gets diluted in the water immediately. But so that's not a problem. Losing water is not a problem to a fish because they live in water. Mammals and amphibians excrete urea, which is more toxic of a nitrogenous waste than uric acid. So mammals and amphibians lose a lot of water when they're excreting their urea. To amphibians, it's not a huge problem because amphibians hang out by the water. But for mammals, we lose a lot of water when we excrete our nitrogenous waste urea, called urine, when it mixes with water. But birds, like reptiles, have that fairly dry nitrogenous waste in their excretory system, which is a way for them to conserve water for life on land. Up north, if you want to attract birds up north in the wintertime, you could put out bird feeders, and that'll attract birds for sure when food is scarce. But if you really want to attract birds, all you have to do is have an electric bird bath. And if there's flowing water, it will attract birds from miles away because birds can't get water from snow. It has to be in the form of a liquid, and liquid water in the wintertime when things are frozen up north will attract birds. So birds have a problem retaining water, and uric acid helps them with that. They don't have to lose a lot of water to get rid of that bird guano, which is a nitrogenous waste. As you know, bird guano, there's an economic value of it for fertilizer because it is high in nitrogen. Reproduction. All birds have internal fertilization, but most birds, males, do not have an intromittent organ like that duck does. Most birds match cloaca to cloaca. This picture on the left I took in the salt pans of Portugal, the Portugal salt pans when I was in the Iberian Peninsula, Portugal and Spain. And the male is on top, female on bottom, and they're just matching a common opening for reproduction and waste called the cloaca, just like a reptile has. Birds have that cloaca, common opening for reproduction and waste. And the male is just matching his cloaca to the female cloaca and transferring sperm that way with no intromittent organ. The ostrich male has an intromittent organ. The male ostrich has a penis, and so do ducks. And here's the story of this Argentine lake duck. A teacher that teaches at Venice High School with me is from Argentina, and he's a physics teacher, but he's very well read in science, and his hobby is reading science articles, cutting edge science. And he came into my room one time, very proud Argentinian, and said, I just read an article that they discovered the Argentine lake duck has the world's largest intromittent organ, male intromittent organ, has the largest penis of any duck. And that penis in that Argentine lake duck is 42.5 centimeters. And 42.5 centimeters is 16 and a half inches long, is that duck's penis. That's the world record. And that looks a lot like a duck that you're probably familiar with. It looks a lot like the ruddy duck. And when I saw that picture, it reminded me of the ruddy duck, and I looked it up, and this species of duck, the Argentine lake duck, is very related to our ruddy duck. And as a matter of fact, another common name for it I discovered instead of the Argentine lake duck is the Argentine ruddy duck. So it is related to a ruddy duck. So it has that world record going for it, thanks to Sergio Godino from Australia for sharing that information with me so I could pass it along to you. The world's largest amniotic egg or land egg is the ostrich egg. Look at that crazy egg, over 3-pound egg that comes from a bird that weighs over 300 pounds as an adult. What hatches out of that 3-pound egg, if it could survive the African savanna for 1 year, we'll have it made, because it will be an 8-foot tall bird that could kick like a horse and run at speeds of 40 miles an hour. So ostriches on the African savanna, when they're adults, don't have a lot of predators, but baby ostriches do. 85% of baby ostriches never make it. If they can make it for their first year, they've got it made. And that is the world's largest amniotic or land egg. Why is it called the amniotic egg? Because the embryo, and if this is an ostrich egg, this would be an ostrich embryo. If it was an American robin egg, this would be a robin embryo. It is surrounded by the amnion, which the amnion has amniotic fluid in it. It's a watery environment for the baby bird to develop into, to develop. And this is the yolk sac, and this is the yolk that gives nourishment for the baby bird in its development. And this is the allantois, the waste storage area where uric acid is stored away from the tissue of the developing baby bird. And the shell in a bird egg, as you know from being familiar with the chicken egg, is very rigid. In a reptile egg, it's more leathery and pliable. And in a reptile egg, this area out here would be gases, but in a bird egg, that is the albumin, the egg white that is inside the chorion. And of course, the chorion is for gas exchange. It's selectively permeable, allows certain materials to enter and leave and others not to enter and leave. So that is the anatomy of the land egg, which was a huge evolutionary advancement over being dependent on water for reproduction like amphibians and fish are. Reptiles were the first to lay the land egg, and then followed by birds and mammals, layers of the land egg. And I could go on for another 3 hours if we were going to have an entire course and you were going to get your 3-hour college credit in the anatomy and physiology of birds. But right now, we're going to end it right there. So we're going to stop, and I am going to answer any questions that you have. And if I don't know the answer, I'll gracefully admit that I don't know the answer rather than making something up. So I'm going to